Okay, why don't we get started? I'm John Haig, and I am the co-director of the Mosava Rahmani Center for Business and Government. We are very fortunate today to kick off our M-RCBG seminar series for the spring semester. We have with us Soroush Saghafian, and I don't know how many of you know Soroush. A couple things I would point out: he is the founder and director of our what we call the Public Impact Analytics Science Lab, PIAS Lab, which is really focused on advancing and applying the science of analytics for solving societal problems that can have any. One thing I want to emphasize is that while Soroush's work really focuses on machine learning and big data analysis tools, he is in many ways the epitome of what we like to have at the Kennedy School. It's rigorous, it's analytical, but it's also very applied. In the sense of it's dealing with really significant societal problems. He develops operational research methods and, quote, in studying stochastic systems with specific applications in healthcare and operations management. So again, a very kind of applied, but very grounded in strong analytics. He does work for a variety of hospitals, focusing on operational efficiency, patient flow, medical decision-making. He is a faculty affiliate of the Harvard PhD program in health policy, the Harvard Center for Health Decision Sciences, and I could go on through a few more various relationships that he has across the university, which just shows the value he has more broadly, not just within the Kennedy School, but across the university. I'm going to just mention that Soroush is going to present for about 30 minutes, maybe a little longer. And then we're going to open it up for questions. And if you want to put a question, just go to the Q&A box and type your question in, and we'll try and track them, and I'll help moderate them. We're also very fortunate to have with us today Richard Zuckhauser, who I will advocate for. Richard, if you are a student at the Kennedy School and you haven't taken his analytic methods course, I would strongly recommend that you do it. I took it when I was a student. It was a single course that affected how I think about the world more than any other course I've ever taken. So, but with that, I want to hand it over to Richard if he's got a few comments about Soroush, and then we'll get into Soroush's presentation.
So it's a privilege to make a few remarks about Soroush. He came to us 7 years ago. He's now an associate professor. I've learned a lot from him over those years, talking about general issues and talking about some work that we're doing together, and in particular talking about exciting work that he's done. I should mention that he won the very prestigious INFORMS. INFORMS is the very distinguished Operations Research Society Young Scholar Award in 2021. It was oriented towards the work he's done in the medical area, probably his area of greatest contribution. He's worked extensively with the Mayo Clinic, but others have heard about it, so now he's working with a variety of hospitals, as John mentioned. A few years ago, Soroush began to teach a highly popular course in machine learning. And today, you're going to learn some of the greatest hits from that course. Now, I might remark that if you read the popular press, machine learning and its cousin artificial intelligence gets some questioning press. One issue is, will it take over the world? Another issue that gets into the popular press a great deal is that the algorithms that somebody use systematically discriminate against minorities, for example. Soroush's work has been focusing on a variety of tasks that our society has to carry out or does carry out. So he'll talk to us today about predicting voting outcomes, identifying cancers, scheduling emergency rooms, directing police resources to areas where crime is most threatening, or quite relevant to yesterday's news, how Supreme Court justices vote. And what he will show you in each case is that the machine learning does a better job in making these decisions than would a human being. But that raises some questions. Would you prefer to get a cancer diagnosis from a machine or from a human being who's had 25 years detecting cancers, even if the machine were more accurate. And my guess is that the answer for many of us today is we prefer the human. My guess is after you listen to Soroush, you may be a little bit less willing to make that decision. So today's talk will make you think deeply about values, and will also make you think creatively about data and analytics. Soroush, I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John and Richard, for the very generous introduction. I'm going to go and share my slides. Again, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to kick off the seminars. My name is again Soroush Saghafian. I'm a faculty member here at Harvard, and I teach a class, as Richard mentioned, on machine learning and big data analytics. In the class, we cover a lot of algorithms and sort of the technical issues regarding the algorithms. But what we do is that we also cover a lot of examples of how machine learning can actually help us address some of the most important societal problems that we have. In recent years, machine learning and AI has actually also enabled us to rethink about some of the policy issues that we have. And so today I would like to share some of those examples with you. So I always start my class by raising this question, and I want to do the same today as well. And the question is, why is machine learning becoming really important? So in the class, I provide 4 examples, but today I won't have time to provide all the 4 examples. But one of the most important answers is that many of the policy questions can be answered with machine learning. So here's, for instance, one example. Are police bigoted and are blacks targeted more? So you may have heard our politician and policymakers sitting down and just arguing about their own opinion, while there is huge amount of data out there, and we have fascinating algorithms that can make sense of that data for us. As some of you may know, many organizations are becoming much more data-driven these days. So titles like CDO, which is the Chief Data Officer, it doubled from 2012 to 2014. So only in 2 years, titles like this doubled. There's a survey of about 1,300 companies worldwide that shows that over half of them use data analytics in everyday decisions. MIT did a survey of about 300 public American companies, and the survey showed that companies that are in top third of their industry, in terms of data-driven decision-making, they were about 5% more productive and about 6% more profitable than their competitors. Similarly, this is not just happening in public or private companies, but the government is also doing a lot of use of machine learning techniques. So here's, for instance, one example. Santa Cruz Police Department in California is using some of these machine learning techniques that I teach in my class for what is called predictive policing. The approach they use is called identify and share. So what they do is that, again, they use some of these machine learning techniques to identify parts of the city or the town where the risk of crime is high at any point of the time, and then they can share that with their officers. And so if you do that, what happens is that you're using your officers much more effectively. I want to also talk about this article from The Economist, which to me asked a good question. And the question is this: is it time to automate politicians? Are we ready to have this machine learning algorithms be built in a robot and have the robot be your politician? Now, why do I think that's an important question to ask? Well, first of all, we know that big data and AI is enabling us to make better decisions. We know that these things are becoming more and more real. They actually ran a poll among the British consumers, and they found that 1 in 4 Brits think that robots would do a better job than humans as politicians. Now, I don't know how much of this was impacted by the issues in the UK, Brexit, and others, but these things are becoming more and more real. So in 2018, for instance, in April, one of the nominees for Tokyo's mayor was actually a robot. So it had a lot of algorithms and machine learning algorithms built in, and it promised fair and balanced representation, and you would ask questions from all the nominees. Everybody had an answer. So for instance, you would ask, what is your plan for addressing Tokyo's traffic, for instance? Everybody has a plan, so does the robot. So the robot has gone through a lot of data and using a lot of algorithms and is able to provide good answers. So the question I urge my students to think of, and I urge you to also think about it, is this: do you think that robots would do a better job than humans as politicians? Let's say in the next couple of decades, in 20 years, are we going to have some robots that will do better job than or politicians? I want to also emphasize that policy making often involves complicated decision making, and the fact is that machine learning techniques have made great progress in this regard. So here's, for instance, one example. This came out of the DeepMind group. They published their results in Nature a couple of years ago, where they showed that some of these algorithms that I teach in my class within the reinforcement learning set of algorithms, they were able to use them to beat the best human player in a very complex game called Game of Go. So for those of you that are not familiar with the game of Go, it's a very complex game, much more complex than chess, and you have to be able to consider a lot of different scenarios. It actually represents a very complex decision-making environment. The important thing, however, here wasn't that they were able to beat the best human player, but more that it was completely tabula rasa, which means that it started completely from scratch. It didn't rely on any human data. So previous machine learning techniques, the way we developed them, we would have a data set that is created by human decision makers, and the algorithm will go through them and will try to learn them and will try to do better. But with this newer techniques, we don't need to rely on human generated data. We have AI agents that can generate their own data and can learn from their own data. And if you do that, then you can remove a lot of biases and other things that happens when we rely on learning from human generated data. Another question I want you therefore to think about is this: can these advancements help us make better policies to essentially resolve some of the societal problems that we have? I want to also mention that it is not just that this AI and machine learning techniques are enabling us to make better decisions, but they are also teaching us about our own ways of decision making. So this came out, for instance, a couple of months ago, actually, in Science by Tom Griffith Group, who's a psychologist at Princeton, and they used this machine learning techniques to understand the fundamental theories of how we as humans actually make decisions, and they found new results. So for instance, are we completely following what prospect theory predicts, or are we doing different things? And the advantage of using this machine learning algorithms is that they can go through huge amount of data and they can make sense of it, and they can provide some insights for us about our own decision making. So again, my point is that they are not just being used to enable us make better decisions, but they're also enabling us to understand our own way of decision making. I want to also talk a little bit about IBM Watson. So in 2005, a team of researchers at IBM started thinking about developing a computer that could compete in Jeopardy. No one at that time knew how to beat humans, or even if it's possible to beat a human in a game like Jeopardy, which is a very complex game, as most of you know. 6 years later, in 2011, there was a 2-game exhibition that aired on TV, and the winner would receive $1 million, the second place would receive $300,000, and the third place would receive $200,000. Who are the contestants? Well, we had Ken Jennings. He had the longest winning streak, 74 games. That's half a year of the show. Then we had Brad Rutter. He was the biggest money winner at the time, over $3 million at the time, had never lost to a human. So Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter, these were extraordinary human players that we had in Jeopardy. And then you have Watson, which is essentially a computer with about 3,000 processors. For some of you may know that this wasn't the first time IBM was trying to do this. In late 80s and in early 90s, they developed Deep Blue, which was able to later in 1997 beat Garry Kasparov in chess. So IBM had some experience with this. But let me show you a little bit about the progress that they made. So on the x-axis here, I have the percentage of questions that each player answers. And on the y-axis, we have precision. So naturally, as you try to answer more questions in a game like Jeopardy, your precision drops. This is where they started. And as you can see, this was their progress. So this was in 2007, and then you go all the way here, it's in 2010. What you want, where you want to be is in this essentially northeast corner. So what are these dots? Well, the lighter dots here these are related to human winners. These are the good human players that we had. The darker dots here this is Ken Jennings. So this is an extraordinary human player that we have here. And as you can see, in 2010, IBM Watson was very close to Ken Jennings. And here's the final result. In 2011, this happened, as you can see, and maybe you remember that IBM Watson was able to beat both Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter by a huge margin. But why do I think it's important? It's not just that it was able to beat, human players in this, but more is that it's being used in a lot of different domains. So in medical diagnosis, for instance, it's being used. You may know that the single most important contributor to malpractices, to the contributor to malpractice claims, or this essentially diagnostic errors, they cost us about $300,000 per claim. Now, IBM Watson has made a huge difference here. The reason it's been able to do that is because it's been trained on huge amount of electronic medical records. It's gone through huge amount of textbooks that we have in medicine and literature. It's gone through more than 5,000 diagnosis questions from the American College of Physicians, Doctor's Dilemma competition. So it's been trained on huge amount of data and has been able to reduce the malpractices that we have. A couple of weeks ago, IBM actually sold this to a private equity company, but that was more for financial reasons. It doesn't have any implications about the impact that it has had. But you can imagine that in the near future, we can go to IBM Watson and ask this type of policy questions even: how to reduce inequality, how to solve looming debt crisis, how to decrease healthcare expenditures, or how to make education affordable. Now, the reason I'm optimistic about this is that because we have, for each of these questions, we have huge amount of data, we have huge amount of literature, papers, textbooks, etc., that are published, and these algorithms can go through all of them in a very quick way and try to learn. So for the rest of the talk, I want to give you some specific examples of how machine learning techniques are being used. One example, some of these examples are from my own work, some of them are from work of others. The first one is how we used it to try to improve the healthcare sector. As you know, in the US, we spend about 20% of our GDP in the healthcare sector. Per capita, that's about 2.5 times average of other OECD countries, and if you compare our outcomes, healthcare outcomes compared to other OECD countries, we are not comparable. So there are several issues going on in the healthcare sector, obviously, but one of the main ones is that we don't even know who is an effective and efficient physician. And to me, trying to improve the healthcare sector, try to make it efficient and effective without knowing what physicians are doing and which of them is effective and efficient, this is sort of not logical to do that. So we wanted the algorithms to go through a large sort of pattern of treatment and how physicians spend their times in emergency rooms and other parts of the hospital, and try to learn from that and try to tell us which of them is actually efficient and effective, right? So efficient means that they are using resources, hospital resources, other resources in an efficient way, but you want them to also be effective, come up with good treatments for the patients. And so we used some of these machine learning techniques. We used DEA, but we also used a lot of clustering algorithms to, again, go through the patterns of physician practices and try to tell us which one of them is actually effective and efficient. In essence, we wanted to have 4 groups, and we wanted the algorithm to assign each of the physicians to one of these 4 groups. Group 1 is the group that is related to those physicians who are high on effectiveness and high on efficiency. Group number 2, high on efficiency but low on effectiveness, so on and so forth. And group number 4 are the physicians who are low on efficiency and low on effectiveness. And so we used a lot of different techniques. So for instance, k-means clustering is one of the techniques we use. We also used other techniques like random forest. We see similar results here. So the green sort of dots here are group number 1 physicians. These are the highly effective and efficient physicians. These other physicians that you see here, group number 4, they are low on effectiveness and efficiency. Now, why this is important is that because now you can go to these people who are in group 4, these physicians, and tell them, hey, if you want to be an effective and efficient physician, these are the type of things you can do. These are type of changes that you have to make. And hospitals therefore can develop training program for these other physicians and try to move them to group number 1. I want to also talk about how these machine learning techniques are allowing us to better understand crimes. So there's in the US, there's a publicly available data set. It's called US rate data set. It has a lot of information for each of the 50 US states about their crime rates. So for instance, you have things about, you have information about per 100,000 residents, rate of assault, rate of murder, rate of rape, a lot of information for each state, percentage of urban population, etc. So if I want to show you some very small part of the picture here, for each of the states, you have things again like murder, assault, urban population, rape, etc., etc. So these data sets, as you can see, are high dimensional, and it's very hard for us to make sense when the data gets high dimensional. I always tell my students that I think Einstein was the only person that I know of who could think in 4 dimensions. Most of us have trouble thinking in even 3 dimensions. But when you get to these data sets that are highly dimensional, you can't even make sense of them. So even simple questions like whether Arizona is, for instance, close to California, or let's say closer to New York, for instance. When the data gets when it comes to crime data, when it comes to this highly dimensional data sets, very hard to answer even simple questions like that. Now we have machine learning algorithms that allow us to reduce the dimensionality of the data, bring it to something that we can see, and therefore that allows us to provide actionable insights. We have a lot of machine learning algorithms, and unfortunately some of them work more like black boxes. They don't let us come up with actionable insights. And when you want to work with policymakers and try to communicate things to them, I think it's very important to use machine learning algorithms that allow you to come up with actionable, essentially, insights. So this is one of them, for instance, that you can use to reduce the dimensionality of the data and reduce it to 2 dimensions. For instance, here we use principal component analysis, but it reduces to 2 dimensions. Now you can easily see. So let's go back to the question that I asked earlier, whether Arizona is, for instance, closer to California or closer to New York. You can see that here, Arizona is much closer to New York. But what is more is that you can go now to the governor of Arizona and say, look, Maine is doing much better than you. And so if you want to be more like Maine, these are the type of things you should do, right? So once you reduce the dimensionality of the data to something that you can understand and everybody can understand, then you can provide a lot of actionable insights. Another example that I have is about how these machine learning techniques are influencing some of the screening policies that we have for diseases. So this is about breast cancer. These machine learning algorithms are now enabling us to understand the subtypes of different diseases. So this is for breast cancer, for instance, and it allows us to understand the subtype of breast cancer and therefore develop more personalized screening policies. A lot of screening policies that we have right now in the US and in a lot of other countries are not personalized mainly because we can't understand the subtypes of the data. So what I have here, this was done in Stanford, by the way, what I have here is that each row is a gene and each column is a person. And so the red colors are the genes that are active, they are expressing themselves. And these algorithms here, specifically hierarchical clustering, the algorithms allow you to look at these patterns and come up with subtype of, again, disease. So for instance, patients who have these genes being active here, you can see that they have this specific type of breast cancer, luminal subtype B. But again, by understanding the subtype of breast cancer, not only we allow the physicians to come up with, personalized treatments, but also we can go back to screening policies that we have and try to see where the gaps are. So the other example that I have is how these machine learning techniques are enabling us to understand how people vote for one candidate versus the other candidate. So let me give you a specific example here. Suppose you are in April 2008. At that time, if you remember, people were thinking about whether Hillary Clinton will win against Obama. Her momentum was picking up actually at that time. Suppose you want to develop a machine learning algorithm that can predict who's going to win. Not only that, but also learn how counties vote and what makes them vote for one candidate versus the other candidate. So the data set that you had access at that time was a huge data set. You could train your algorithms on that data set. Essentially, the data was coming from all the counties in which the primaries were done. The data set includes a lot of different information. So you have a lot of different demographic measures, things like age, ethnic makeup, education, religious breakdown, etc. You have access to political measures, you have access to economic measures, a lot of information in these data sets, again, high dimensional data sets. So a simple question you might have is that, well, given all those potential predictors, which one explains the county level voting patterns more? And if you use some of this machine learning algorithms, specifically within the class of classification and regression algorithms, one of the main sort of strategies there is called recursive binary splitting. And if you use that, you would see that the most important sort of predictor here is the percentage of the county that is African American. And as a matter of fact, it also gives you an optimal splitting value on that, which is 20%. So very simply, you can have this very simple rule that whether, that asks this question, is the percentage of African Americans in that county higher than 20%? Yes or no? If yes, it predicts Obama. If no, predicts Clinton. But you can improve the algorithm by continuing this recursive binary splitting essentially and come up with a better sort of algorithm that, again, not only allows you to predict what will happen, but also will give you insights about what is it that people are voting for one candidate versus the other. So another advantage of using this types of algorithms is that they are hugely interpretable. So interpretability is very important. As I mentioned earlier, some of the algorithms work more like black boxes, but this set of algorithms are highly interpretable. As a matter of fact, you can even put it on New York Times and everybody who can read New York Times will understand it. And New York Times actually did this. So this is the algorithm that they put on in New York Times. And let me show you a little bit more about what is happening here. So this is the first question. Is a county more than 20% Black, yes or no? If the answer is no, then it's asking, the algorithm is asking another question, which is the high school graduation rate higher than 78%? If no, then it asks whether it's higher than 87%, so really highly educated. If yes, again, predicts Obama. If no, it goes to another question, where the county is. Is it in Northeast or Southwest or Midwest? Then it goes to some economic measures like whether the household is poor or not. What is the population density? Then it goes to some other political measures, like, for instance, whether the county voted for Bush versus Kerry in the previous election, yes or no. So you get this very interpretable algorithms that are both really good in terms of prediction, but also the algorithm gives you a lot of insights about what is happening. So I want to also talk about how these algorithms are being used to predict the outcomes of Supreme Court. As Richard mentioned, we had, Supreme Court is always in the news list. One special case was yesterday, but now these algorithms are being used to also predict what happens when a case goes through the Supreme Court, and also understanding how justices actually vote for cases. So one example that I have here was done by, was done by Professor Martin, who was at Washington University in 2004. What they did, they used these algorithms, and there's a publicly available data set here, but you can use it if you are interested. But the data they used at that time included about 628 previous Supreme Court cases. These are the cases that occurred between 1994 and 2001. So they trained their algorithm over this data set. They made predictions about 68 cases that would be decided next year. So these are the cases that haven't gone through the Supreme Court. They wanted to make predictions about them. What was interesting was that they also asked a lot of experts who, law professors and others who really know, who are really familiar with this, how cases are voted in Supreme Court, and they asked them to also do the same prediction. And they wanted to predict who does better. Are the law professors and other people who are experts in decisions that are made at the Supreme Court level, are they better in predicting the outcomes, or are the algorithms are better in predicting the outcomes? So let me show you the first how the algorithm thinks the justices are making decisions, but also the performance that I just mentioned, comparing the performance of human experts with algorithms. So this is for Justice O'Connor, one of the justices at the time. And this is how the algorithm is trying to replicate how the Justice O'Connor is making decisions, right? So the first question, and this is not an if then sort of scenario that we have given to the computer. The computer has only access to the data and is trying to extract pattern from the data. And this is the pattern that it has extracted from the data for specifically Justice O'Connor. And this is, again, the algorithm is trying to represent how Justice O'Connor is making decisions. So the first question is this: is the lower court decision liberal, yes or no? If the answer is no, then there's another question. Is it coming from second or third DC or federal circuit court? Yes or no? If no, is the respondent the US? If yes, then you see other question here, for instance, whether it's related to First Amendment, yes or no, and some other questions. So this is how the algorithm is predicting and is trying to come up with a pattern about how the Justice O'Connor was making decisions at the time. So let me show you also the performance of this algorithms versus the performance of the best human experts that we have. So in terms of overall case prediction, the machine learning models did much better. So their accuracy was about 75%. The accuracy of the experts were 59%. I want to emphasize again that these are actual experts. These are law professors and other people who study Supreme Court cases. In terms of individual justice prediction, however, the machine learning algorithms and the experts were comparable. So there's not much difference when it comes to individual justice prediction. But in terms of if you're interested to predict the overall what happens for the case, machine learning algorithms did much better. So here's the performance of the machine learning models, triangles, and the dots are essentially human experts. You can see that for a lot of these justices that are on the left, the machine learning model is doing much better. For the justices that are on the right here, the experts are doing slightly better. But as I said, if you are worried about the overall prediction, what happens to each case, machine learning model has much higher accuracy than the human experts here. Part of another example that I have here is what I teach in my class, which is about this whole area of misinformation, which is unfortunately growing really fast, fake news, misinformation, and other things. Some of these machine learning techniques, unfortunately, are being used to develop misinformation, to create misinformation, essentially, and fortunately also to detect them. So one case that I teach in my class is about how we can train a neural network, a recurrent neural network, to give fake speeches of President Obama, for instance. And these are the previous techniques, and these are the newer techniques. If I show you videos of the previous techniques, you wouldn't know. You would know exactly that this is a fake speech. You could guess that. But with the newer techniques, there is no way for us or anybody to say that this is a fake speech. As a matter of fact, when I show this to my students, they cannot tell whether it's a fake speech or not. But with this advancements in machine learning, and specifically in deep learning and recurrent neural networks, we now have the ability to create a fully fake speech of important people and create huge amount of misinformation, unfortunately. And so this can have huge impact, and I want you to think about such impacts. Another example that I have here is about our own work in trying to understand the startup ecosystem. So we did some work trying to understand the startup ecosystem, trying to help policymakers understand what they should do to improve the ecosystem for growing the startups. We developed some algorithms that do actually very good job in predicting what startups are going to be successful, what startups are going to be able to attract money, grow, and what startups cannot do that. So I have the reference here. It's a book chapter that we recently published. If you're interested in that area, I urge you to read that as well. And finally, I want to talk about my last example is about predicting civil wars. This machine learning techniques now are being used also to predict civil wars, but more importantly, to understand what essentially causes civil wars. So if you think about the previous literature and the previous understanding of what creates civil wars, there is a long-standing literature that suggests that civil wars are driven by collective grievances that are stemming from ethnic diversity and or income inequality. So this was our understanding before using this machine learning techniques on civil war data sets and cases of civil war. When we use newer machine learning techniques, we get a different picture. So these machine learning techniques actually tell us that civil wars are largely driven by opportunities for insurgency, which is a different picture than what we knew from the literature before using machine learning techniques. That what we learn from this machine learning techniques is that intrastate conflicts emerge in states that are not strong enough to essentially control potential rebellious groups and where such groups can actually thrive. So this is a slightly different picture than the literature on civil war told us before, the literature started using machine learning techniques. The algorithms do a very good job in terms of predicting civil wars and in trying to understand the civil wars. I'm not going to go through their performance, but here you see that the areas on their curves of these algorithms are being really great. So now I want to conclude, and this is my last slide. So I think that machine learning and big data analytics is becoming increasingly important. I think big data means that data availability is increasing. Data is influencing how we understand things. And I think that is increasingly driving policy decisions. Many of the policy issues, I want to reiterate that they require very complex decision-making, and the advancements in machine learning in making those complex decision-making can be really helpful. I think that machine learning and big data analytics create a great opportunity for us to be able to influence how our policies are shaped, to influence public policy and try to, resolve some of the societal problems that we have. I want to also mention again that we no longer need to rely on human data. As I showed you in one example, we can have AI agents that create their own data and learn from their own data as opposed to relying on human-generated data. And so one of the main issues with sort of algorithmic bias is that people think algorithms are biased. Algorithms are not biased. We train them on biased data, that is a data set that is created by a biased human decision maker. And then we expect the algorithm not to be biased. That's not logical. With these newer techniques, however, what we have in hand is that we can have AI agents create their own data, and therefore, you have the ability to create unbiased data if you want, and learn from unbiased data, train your algorithm over unbiased data. And finally, I hope that I have been able to influence you to learn more and think more about these advancements and try to use them in your own organization, in your own research, or whatever you are doing. So with that, I'm going to stop here. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Terrific. Thank you, Soroush. I am going to parse some of the questions. We have a number of questions in the chat room in the quick Q&A session, and I'm going to pull some of those forward. But I don't know, Richard, if you have anything you want to ask to start with, and then I'll start pulling questions from the Q&A box.
Yes. So Soroush, first, that was a very interesting and provocative presentation. Most of your discussion was of machines versus human decision makers. But we know, for example, in chess, that centaurs, which are humans working with machines, are better even than machines.
Yep.
And in many of your examples, I think that that's likely to be the case. And I think that's important for a variety of reasons. One, humans want to have a role. Second, they often bring complementary information. This might be new information that's not part of your data set. So we're trying to decide whether Russia will invade the Ukraine in the next 3 months. I would sort of want some foreign policy experts to complement anything that you might have learned over the past dozen years. Third, there may be some ancillary issues. So for example, if I think that a doctor together with a machine might do better than a machine in diagnosing whether there's a cancer.
Yep.
But even if the doctor were no better, you as the patient, if the machine just spits out the diagnosis, it's not quite the same as saying the doctor, here's the diagnosis, Mr. Saghafian, here's what we might do, so on and so forth. So I really say this to all the people on this call who might be worrying, oh my God, I'm going to be put out of business. I think that's going to be true if you play Go.
Yep.
I don't think that that's going to be true if you're worried about how to deal with inequality or the debt crisis or whatever else it is. The policy implication is that either we should take your course or we should read the book that you're now writing.
Yeah.
And I would be happy to hear and surprised if you disagreed with those last policy recommendations.
No, I think that's a fascinating point. Very, very, very correct also, because, a lot of things that I also teach in my class is about developing sort of decision support for the human actors. And like a lot of work that I've done with Mayo Clinic, we developed these algorithms, but at the end of the day, this provides a decision support for the physician who has to make the final call. And by looking at what the algorithm is suggesting, they may agree or they may not agree. But it's very important to give the sort of last call in a lot of applications. As you said, in some applications, no, you can just have the computer to make the final call. But in a lot of applications, the collaboration between human and computer becomes very important, as you said.
So Soroush, I'm going to start with some questions, and there are some that are more kind of the functionality, if you will, of machine learning,
Yep.
and some that get to various value questions. And I'll start with the kind of more functionality kinds of questions. But one person, and you answered this, Richard raised a similar question, but you answered part of this. But the question really is, machine learning depends on machine learning from the data set. And how do you know when the machine learned enough to pass the threshold of making correct decisions, predictions better than human? And then the other part of the question, which I think you already addressed to some extent, was is it an either or type of problem, or is it something where the combination of a human and a machine learning process would lead to better answers? So we'll start with that one. Also within that context, a related question was, for example, in a more absolute sense, when you have less data or very little data, and you started to answer this, but you might elaborate a little bit. So for example, in COVID-19, in the early kind of when COVID-19 was first showing up, how could machine learning really predict in that context? So so start with that on the threshold questions about sufficient data.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you, John. Very good questions. So in terms of one of the things I want to mention, yeah, there are various applications in which we do not have enough data. In those applications, this newer advancements where we ask the AI agents to create their own data, and we train the algorithm over the AI generated data rather than human generated data. I think that's a huge deal going forward. In some applications like, COVID, for instance, I worked with the government of Bahrain very early on before WHO announced anything. They had suspicion about something going on, and I worked with them developing some algorithms to think whether, there's going to be something or not. We did have a lot of data, not in terms of cases, but you have other related data that you can rely. You had previous infections of other types. You had a lot of data on influenza, like Spanish influenza and other things. you had some cases going on, and you can quickly learn about how fast things can move. But in a lot of cases, it might not make sense to use the machine learning. So I'm not advocating for using machine learning in every single application. In a lot of applications when there is huge data sets, obviously, and the decision making is complicated. So when we think about comparing human decision makers versus computer predictions, one of the things is that research shows us is that the human brain cannot handle, a lot of variables. In the Supreme Court example, for instance, the law professors, their minds were, that's what they indicated in the surveys, that they were affected by some specific cases. So this Justice O'Connor, did something in 3 years ago, and that affected how these experts think. So they sort of mask other variables and they focus on a few variables, versus the machine, the algorithms can go through all of the data, all the variables, and try to understand which one is important and which one is not important. So I want to finish with saying that, as Richard said, it's very important to have this sort of collaboration, and there is a huge research going on, a stream of research going on in terms of making the collaboration between humans and machines stronger.
So a couple more questions, and I'm consolidating. So those of you who put questions into the Q&A function, thank you for doing that, because there's some terrific questions. I'm trying to consolidate a few of them given the time. One question, if I synthesize a little bit, is that you can think about description, and then you can think about prescription. And machine learning as a descriptive function seems terrific. But you have a number of times kind of made reference to then it can tell you what you should do to improve on the dimensions outlined in the model.
Yep.
Right? And how do you think about the causal relationships from a machine learning model as a starting point? The second part of that will be about values, but we'll start with that first piece.
Yeah. So the causal machine learning is an area of research where there's been huge amount of advancements in research here. Is still very hot topic that I'm working on and other people are working on as well. So I teach 2 sessions in our advanced econometric PhD econometric class on how machine learning is being used for causal inference and for making causal relationships. So a lot of advancements have been made. It's still an active area of research, obviously. You need other sets of assumptions, other sets of algorithms. One of the areas I'm actively working on is on using reinforcement learning for causal inference, and a lot of advancements have been made there. But one of the things, even if you use it for predictions, but you use this sort of algorithms that allow you to have interpretability, you can generate insights. And so that's the first step, is to generate insights, to generate hypotheses, and try to look at the hypothesis and try to form your mind about what might be going on there.
So let me, a couple of questions have come up about the Santa Cruz policing example. And one, and I must confess, I'm imposing part of my own question into this, but there is a kind of dynamic versus a static perspective on this, and the question of feedback loops. So if you're identifying where crime is likely to occur within 150 by 150 meter square, and then you take actions to address that, are you in fact then changing the structure of the model and the structure of the outcomes by the actions that are taken? And how do you account for that in a machine learning context?
Yeah, that's a good question. So these algorithms first, learn from historic data, but then you make them adaptive. So once you make them adaptive, what it means is that they are adaptively, learning from incoming data. So if you make a decision and it affects the outcome, goes back to the data set and you learn. And that, some of the algorithms we use for fraud detection, for instance, are very good in that. So, when you use your credit card, there's 2 seconds that it tries to go through an algorithm fast to verify whether it's fraud or whether it's a legitimate transaction. And those algorithms are very similar to this example that I mentioned about detecting crime and things like that. They are fully adaptive. So when there's a fraud detected, goes back to the data set, the algorithm is retrained quickly on that and learns from that. So we have this, adaptivity that is important, online learning essentially.
So this next question, for me, anyhow, personally, I'm trying to figure out how I would answer it, and I don't know, okay? Because it's a complicated question related to values, and it's a question related to machine learning output relative to the process of integrating that machine learning output into societal values. And that's a pretty generic, but I'll give you the specific question. Basically, with regard to predictive policing, isn't being more effective, e.g. targeted areas, potential, harmful, and discriminatory? Even if an algorithm is accurate, this may target resources that disproportionately affect low-income individuals or people of color. Then isn't the question effectiveness at what societal cost?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is part of, what becomes really important in how you train your algorithm and how you test them. So there's a lot of steps in testing the algorithms just to make sure that, they are not trained in a biased way, or they are not making, biased decisions. And so as long as you have a clear, objective that you can form, then you can use them and test them. There's a lot of testing going on, and so you develop the algorithm and then you test it and you realize that, well, it's making bad judgments. It can be biased, or it can be against the egalitarian ideas, or other things that might be going on. So that is actually an important part when I bring up this question with my student about whether they think that we can replace politicians with machine learning algorithms built in a robot. One of the first things that we discuss is, okay, so what is a value? When do we say, the algorithm is doing better than a politician, right? So the value there, and in policymaking, this is very important. I would like to also maybe ask Richard to add a couple of points, because about, coming up with values. He's a better expert in that area than I am, about making sure that the utility function that we use is actually not a bad utility function, essentially, right?
So Richard, I will let you think about that and give you one of the last words on that aspect. But there are, and again, I apologize to everybody who's put questions into the question box. Some terrific questions, and we're just not going to be able to get to all of them. But one of there are a couple of questions.
To the other questioners.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I cede. I give up my time.
You give your time to the other questioners. So a couple of them that are more relatively straightforward, maybe. Somebody asked, can you identify situations where machine learning has failed? Right. And I think it's pretty hard to separate the answer to that question from the discussion we were just having about values, and in particular, how do you define kind of better, right? But the question was, how do you, can you identify some examples where it's failed? And in conjunction with that, as a tool, how can you, this is a different question, but I'll get them both out here real quickly. Are there tools that machine learning can be used for? Or is there a way to use machine learning to address things like fake speech, which people find obviously very, very scary and troubling?
Yeah. So let me answer the second question first, if you don't mind, which is about fake, fake speeches and things like that. There are people who are developing these algorithms to create misinformation, to create fake speeches and things like that. At the same time, there are people who are developing sort of same algorithms to detect them and to try to block them. It's very much like what hackers do and what safety software developers try to block hackers from doing things, and both of them go side by side, and things get improved over time. With respect to the first question of whether there are cases where machine learning fails, a lot of examples. I have had a lot of projects with hospitals trying to help them make better decisions, but the algorithm fails. But what is important here is to learn from the failures essentially and try to see why the algorithm failed and use other algorithms that might not have that disadvantage. In analytics, what is important is to use good essentially models and good algorithms that understanding what algorithm is good for a specific application. That sort of needs a lot of experience, needs a lot of I think art as well as science and experience.
Right. So we're getting close to the witching hour. There are some questions about, there's a question about, and I think you've answered this to some extent, but the description, if I can find it here. So have you done, are there kind of rigorous testing of machine learning outcomes relative to structured expertise elicitation? And so, there's a lot of models of human prediction. Sometimes experts don't predict actually as well as generalists looking at a lot of data. Have you compared some of these models? And I think that's what you've done with a lot of the examples you provided us, but is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I can give a specific example that we have a large project going on right now with the Mayo Clinic, we are asking, a large number of physicians to predict who is going to be readmitted to the hospital. We have algorithms that can predict that. As some of you may know, getting readmitted to a hospital is very costly for the healthcare sector, both for hospitals, and for patients, for everybody is costly to get readmitted to the hospital. It means that essentially your issue wasn't resolved. And so we are developing some algorithms that can predict that and flag that and tell the physician, hey, you need to do something else. Otherwise, there's 90% chance that this patient gets readmitted to the hospital soon. So those are the type of things which becomes very important. How do you compare? How do you make sure that the same information is given to the human experts, same information that is given to the algorithm, so that you have very fair comparison. And this article that I had in my slides from Science, which was published a few months ago, comparing algorithms with how we make decisions, essentially, that provides some good insights as well.
So we are at the witching hour. There are a couple of things I want to mention. One, a few of you have asked whether the paper on voting and county voting patterns, could we get a reference for that? We will try to post that up on the website, and we'll post it in conjunction with, a number of you have asked, are the slides going to be available? What we'll do next week is post the recording on our YouTube channel, and so you'll be able to see the slides there, and maybe we'll try to figure out if in conjunction with that we can post the reference to the paper on county voting. And a number of you, again, I apologize that I couldn't get to all the questions. I think it's a good sign that people seem to be very engaged. Some of them were more technical. Somebody was just asking about, given the advancements in AlphaGo and AlphaFold, do you think we're getting closer to solve P versus NP problems? That's a fairly precise question. I'm going to leave it. You can send those. We'll try to collect these questions and pass them along to Soroush. The problem is we don't know necessarily the connection back to all of you. So if you want, you can find Soroush's email on the Kennedy School and the M-RCBG website, and you can send your questions through to him, and to the extent he has time, given his schedule, he can respond if he has the capacity and time to do that. But the last thing I want to say is, first of all, thank you, Soroush. This was incredibly helpful for me. I'm a relatively novice around machine learning. Richard, thank you for taking the time. Thank you to all of you who put questions into the question box. Victoria has posted the YouTube channel, I think, but that'll be up on the website. And again, thank you all for joining us. Terrific outpouring of participation. So thanks, everybody.